Welcome to the Bulwark podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. It is Friday, and amazingly, we start off this Friday with some pretty good news on the jobs numbers. The economy adding a whole lot of jobs, and then revising the number from December. So, Tim Miller, we can start on a high note. By the way, good morning, Tim.
Good morning, Charlie. Starting on a note of optimism. That's fresh. I
The-
kind of feel like there's a bait and switch coming or something. I'm
no,
not
no.
used to this cheery tone from you to start.
Well, I figured we would just sort of set the table with this. Although it occurs to me, looking at these numbers, is it possible the Bureau of Labor Statistics just isn't very good at this? You know what I'm saying? It's like everybody was like, the entire narrative was how terrible December was. It was really terrible. It was really, and they go, hey, never mind. Actually, the economy created more than 500,000 jobs in December. Are bad. So what?
So yeah, here's where my old Republican might come out, Charlie. I do think that government bureaucracies sometimes aren't as good as they maybe might make themselves out to be. I know that this is going to be a shocking observation to you. I want to go back and revisit something when I realized this about the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, and it was when I was doing something that kind of fills me with a little bit of shame now. But I was a young man working at the Republican National Committee. And, and Barack Obama was in office, and every month these numbers come out, and every month you got to put out a statement that's like, well, the jobs weren't not, where are the jobs, President Obama? And, it was kind of one of the parts of the job I really hated. Because I was like, I don't want to have to put anything out about this. It seems kind of stupid and performative, but there was pressure from on high. And one thing I started to notice as we did this was like the revisions are very common. Like, so it's like
Hey,
all it's from voluntary form the businesses fill out. Sometimes the form businesses don't fill out the form. It has the same problem that polls do. So as far as margin of error, so one Friday a month, the first Friday of every month, people get all hot and bothered about this. And it is always best to kind of wait a few
yeah.
months. So that doesn't really serve our political and media purposes.
And it's also not possible. Maybe they're just having a particularly hard time though counting jobs during the pandemic.
Yeah,
It just
yeah,
seems
for sure.
these revisions are
500,000 off is pretty bad.
so
Kind of a
we can
lot.
talk we can talk about the China we don't see any genocide Olympics a little while, whether or
Just
not we're
just
gonna.
one more thing on the job
Yeah,
side, on
oh
the
sure,
positive
sure.
side, yeah, if you don't
Yeah,
mind.
before we
There
dive into the dysfunction,
yeah, there
dystopia.
there was, an encouraging number, though, about the labor participation rate. And again,
Yeah,
hopefully that doesn't get revised back down last month, but I like one of the, issues, in the economic recovery is, it's been kind of weird, right, is that the market's doing good, the unemployment number is looking good, but there's been this sort of displacement and this lack of matching of people getting back into the workforce. And so while the unemployment number has gone down, like the number of people in the workforce hasn't really changed all that
yeah.
much. It's ticked up a little bit. That changed a lot in this last report. Now, again, hopefully we just said,
Maybe.
yeah, we just said maybe there'll be a revision. But I
Yeah.
was happy to see Klain this morning was touting that. And I've been happy to see the Biden administration touting that because and that is really where, you know, that's going to have an impact on the inflation, right? Part of the thing that's driving up prices for people is the lack of folks getting back into the workforce and getting back to the kind of workforce participation rate we had before the pandemic. So I was happy to see them touting that, and that if that continues this year would be good news. So knock on wood for that.
It could. Get back to me in April. We'll look at
Yeah, exactly.
these numbers. So as I said, we're about to have we don't see any genocide Olympics in China. I tweeted out snarkily this morning. I said, remember when we said never again? We will never again avert our eyes from genocide. Apparently, it came with an asterisk. Unless there are the Olympics, there's games, big TV contracts, and it's China. Apparently we just treat China like it's in a box. Doesn't it feel like China's in a box that if anybody else tried this shit, that it would play out differently? But it's China, and like I don't know. The
Yeah,
NBA's got to play. It's like got to make sell movies. What?
yeah, I've been saying this for months. I really don't get it. I don't. I'd feel bad for the athletes, right? The Olympics
Mm,
is, a lot of these sports, right? These are not the same as your big major team sports where the athletes have a lot of chances to shine.
I know.
It's only every 4 years, right? So that might be right in your peak as an athlete. So I do feel bad for the athletes. But it kinda seems like the old college sports thing where people said, "We do feel bad for the
Yeah, I
student
know.
athletes, but we're gonna keep paying them nothing." Like, it doesn't seem like we're really participating in it because people care about the athletes' feelings. It does, seem more about all of the corporate and financial windfall
You
that
think?
surrounds it. Right, yeah, I mean, that's not an obvious take, but why it Beijing, I said this last time on the live stream, and folks, we welcomed Will Salatin to the live stream. So if you're not a
Yeah.
Bulwark Plus member, join and go listen to that because we covered a lot of ground. But they had this fucking thing in 2008. It definitely seems like the Chinese are gaming the system with the IOC. I mean, they just had the Olympics. What's that? 15 years ago. There are a lot of countries on Earth. I don't understand why the West is not flexing their muscle and saying no. To this type of thing. We shouldn't be participating in this. It's not only the genocide, but it's Hong Kong. It's the way they're menacing Taiwan. It's Tibet. It's the virus
Yeah, they had the
which they
virus
lied
today.
about. There's this little virus that killed millions of people that they lied about and were responsible for. I haven't seen them take responsibility for that and apologize and try to reform so that the next time there's a coronavirus that spurs out of somewhere in China that they're going to act differently. I don't see an argument for participating in this,
No,
honestly, besides the feelings of the athletes, which I do feel bad for, but the
I
rest of
feel
it.
yeah, right. I feel the same thing. I really, given the fact it's only once every 4 years and they work so hard and and they don't get a lot of other
Yeah.
rewards for it. So yes, I feel for them, but the thing is such a ridiculous farce.
Yes, and
So,
tonight they're gonna have the opening ceremonies. It's tonight, right, or is it tomorrow?
I'm
Yeah,
skipping it, so
and it
it's not
you
on
know
my
exactly
dance
what it's
card.
gonna be, and it's
Yeah.
gonna be just this
Raw, raw
whole,
China.
yeah, rah-rah China, the Chino jingoism, and look, I was happy that Biden made some steps, to not have a diplomatic corps or whatever,
Yeah.
participate in the charade, but I did think it was a kind of an opportunity for him to take back some of the nationalistic fervor. Maybe I haven't seen any polling data on this, so I might be wrong, but I do think that there are opportunities for them to signal that no, that they are tough on China because they are, sometimes it doesn't feel like the Democrats' rhetoric matches their actions on this because the Biden has
Really?
kept the Trumpian tariffs on China. And if you like pay close attention to speeches that don't make the headlines, the rhetoric is not kind to Xi. It's frankly tougher than what Trump used to say about him. But you don't see the big statement of principle, and a big attempt to stick a middle finger into China's eye, which they deserve. And
Yeah,
it's just like if it was just the
richly.
virus, that would be one thing. The virus is bad enough, but they're one of the most repressive regimes in the world. I just don't understand why we're giving them this platform.
Well, I agree. Okay, so this is Friday,
Yeah,
and this is the week. It has been less than a week since the former president of the United States actually stood up and dangled pardons for
yeah,
the insurrectionists of January 6th. It has been less than a week since the former president of the United States, reading off the teleprompter, threatened mass demonstrations and unrest if prosecutors tried to hold him accountable. We have learned all sorts of things this week, including about possible plan to have the federal government seize voting machines. We know a little bit more now about the way those faked and forged electoral certificates might have been used to overturn the election. By the way, his phrase, overturn the election. So I kind of want to put a line under this. Like, people, I know we've been dealing with this for a long time, but this is fucking insane stuff. But just in case you don't think it's fucking insane enough, the Republican National Committee today, in this week when all of this is going on, is passing a resolution censuring Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney, the two Republicans who are honest enough to want to find out the truth of the insurrection. I mean, it is beyond. I know that it's gotten. I'm struggling against this. Look. At this RNC meeting, they're going to declare her Republican opponent to be the actual nominee without even having the primary or something like that. But I mean,
yeah, the endorsed.
there's no discussion of Trump's behavior didn't come up. There was no suggestion that they were going to censure Marjorie Taylor Greene, Paul Gosar, Lauren Boebert, Madison Cawthorn for the latest insane bigoted thing that they have said. So the purge is only for Cheney and Kinzinger because there's only one standard in this party, which is loyalty to the Orange God King and his obstruction of justice. But, and I tweeted this out, I need to spend a moment on this. Did you read the actual text of the resolution? Have you seen this, Tim?
I didn't read it till read your morning email right before
Oh,
I came on,
okay.
so you
Oh,
can
oh,
share it
okay,
with
okay.
the world.
Okay. So this is how the Republican National Committee is describing the investigation into this violent attack on the Capitol that left 5 people dead, hundreds of people, including police officers, wounded. This is the language. Quote, Representatives Cheney and Kinzinger are participating in a Democratic-led, here it comes, persecution of ordinary citizens engaged in legitimate political discourse. Ordinary citizens, legitimate political discourse. Remember, this
Who
past
drafted this this Orwellian
yeah,
like, honestly,
and it
who comes
passed
up with this?
well, good question, and it passed unanimously. Not one person on the resolutions committee said, "Hey, maybe some crazy redneck rube congressman is gonna say that this was a normal tourist visit or something like that," or maybe, Ron Johnson might say something stupid about it being, just legitimate discourse. But do we really, as the Republican National Committee, want to use that language? And the Republican National Committee's answer is fuck yeah. Yeah, we are all in on this.
Yeah, there's a lot there, Charlie. I want to get back to the Trump part, but and the lack of condemnation from him because I think it's actually worse than you laid out.
Wow.
But just on the Kinzinger and Cheney part first, the unanimous thing is really telling, because there are a lot of how should we say it? You remember the privately concerned from the Trump era? There was you'd get a Bob Costa or a Maggie Haberman story that would have a privately concerned Republican that was not putting their name on the record, but just wasn't so sure that they thought worried that the president had gone a little too far this time. They hoped that he, pivoted back to care about the issues. That was a common phrase. A lot of those folks are like on this committee, right? I mean, now the committee is some crazy people, right? The committee is made up of state party chairs and state party national committee women, so and men. So it's sometimes grassroots MAGA folks from the states, but it's also sometimes people hold that role who have had a position within the party for a long time, and it's an honorary thing, and they're your traditional establishment Republican types. So a lot of these, types who've been around the committee for ages. Ron Kaufman's an example. This was
Mhm.
a guy who was Mitt Romney's aide de camp, longtime Massachusetts guy. He's been on the committee for ages. This is you wouldn't have thought Ron Kaufman would be a coup guy, right? I'm just using him as an example,
Right.
and he's the type of person that goes around Washington, still dining out with people with his friends from both parties, and anytime the Trump crazy stuff comes up, it's like, well, he overstepped a little bit there. There was none of that. There were no objections from any of the quote unquote good Republicans on the committee. And there's almost 200 people. There was not a single person
It's
who said
amazing.
no. I cannot sign on to something that calls January 6th legitimate political discourse. Legitimate political discourse. I cannot sign on to a thing that kicks out Liz Cheney, who is a Republican in good standing on every issue. She's not a Tim Miller squish. She's a Republican in good standing, a conservative on every single issue except for the fact that she's not
Go on.
for a Donald Trump autocracy. Like that's
Yeah.
it. That's the only. She was even with fucking Trump all the way up until he tried to steal
Wow.
the election. And
Wow.
so and there's not a single person on the committee that says, "Wait a minute, like this is too far." And that is a cult. I was happy to see Romney and Cassidy tweeted
Yep.
about it this morning. But like that's it. Like you have a committee 168, you have 168 people. That is a cult that they have signed a blood oath to Donald Trump, and they are the representatives of the Republican Party. Like we all knew all this, but that is still pretty. The unanimousness of it
I know.
is
Yeah.
really something.
So, there's been a lot of, I think, wish casting about, Trump's grip on the Republican Party seems to be loosening. And there's a couple of data points. You can point to a couple of polls, the fact that some of the Trump endorsed candidates aren't raising a lot of money. But I think that what's happening in Salt Lake City, where the RNC is meeting, is kind of that reality check that no, they are still completely in his thrall. And also, they're just not going to move on. I mean, it's clearly there's only one litmus test, and it is his airing of grievances. But I do sense, you tell me. I mean, again, I confess that I probably am not a fair broker because I still suffer from PTSD over the last 6 years. But I sense a little bit of frustration among Republicans, or maybe I'm projecting that they think they have some good issues. They think they're going to win this year, and a lot of them would like to move on. Remember, that was the reason for getting rid of Liz Cheney, is that she kept talking about it. Why won't she move on? And clearly, Trump is saying, no, you are not moving on. This is it. 2022 is all about relitigating this. 2024 is all about my grievances and relitigating all of this. And there have to be some frustration among Republicans saying, oh, good grief, we have all of this other stuff we could be talking about. And yet this guy is going to force us to keep coming back to the big lie, to the obstruction of justice, to the coup over and over and over again. What do you think?
Well, yeah, there is that frustration, and you can see it. You can see it, and here's how they're dealing with it. The Republicans who agree with the way that you framed that question, they're just not. They're just trying to pretend like he doesn't exist, right?
Yeah,
Like they're, and this goes back to the Sarah Longwell article from a couple weeks ago about the parallel universe strategy, right?
right.
And it's working. And so I think I understand. I think that there's sometimes some frustration, with people on the left, that's like, well, why are you talking about this? And people in the media, there's Trump fatigue. And I want to get to this in a second. Why are you talking about this? But like the Democrats, as a political matter, need to wedge to figure out a way to break that parallel universe strategy. And this and these sorts of things, the RNC type action is just one arrow in that quiver, right? Because like they cannot be allowed to get away with this, right? Like there are a lot of Republican candidates. I wrote about David McCormick in Pennsylvania. There are a lot of these Republican candidates that are going to try to do the Glenn Youngkin two-step on this. They cannot be allowed to get away with the National Party unanimously siding with the domestic terrorists. That is
Yeah.
absolutely insane. It is far beyond the pale from what we've seen from. I mean, both national parties are kind of kooky and have strange resolutions from time to time. Like this is another matter entirely.
And it was completely voluntary as well. There was no need
Yeah.
for the Republican National Committee to weigh in on this at all. So,
No. But just,
yeah,
really quick on the
sure.
media thing with Trump, because we joke and laugh. It's like, well, the committee didn't censure the guy that tried to seize the ballot boxes. But I don't know. I haven't been on, now in 2 weeks with you, Charlie. So all of the revelations that have come out in that time, both some
Yeah.
of them weren't even revelations, both from Trump, saying, in the statement that he wanted Mike Pence to overturn the election, to the New York Times story saying that no, it wasn't some outsider's random memo. It was Trump himself that was,
Yeah,
suggesting that they seize the ballot boxes. I I feel like the reaction to this has been maintains, continues to be
I agree.
understated across the
Totally.
board. Obviously the Republicans aren't doing anything. The good Republicans, even Mitt, these guys aren't saying anything. But the media, I just don't know. Sometimes I think it's hard that Trump has just created this environment of crazy, the farrago of crazy, as you like to say, that prevents, that makes it hard for the media to judge what's news, what's not news. But like if you had told me 10 years ago that a former president of the United States would admit that he attempted a coup, like you would
Yeah.
think that would have been fucking front page news in every paper in the country for a while, for days maybe. But
You'd
it was like
think.
it didn't even
You'd
make
think.
the paper in certain places. You know what I mean? Like people just
No,
sort
I
of
do
moved on.
know.
Another crazy statement from the orange guy in Miami. I don't know. I've been pretty disappointed with the mainstream reaction to it. I think there's a fatigue that's
I
related
think
to it, but it shouldn't be.
Yeah, I think there is a fatigue. So there's a development that let's not spend a lot of time on to wait to see whether it actually plays out.
Yeah.
But Huffington Post, is it SV Date,
Yeah.
is reporting. He's a good reporter. He's reporting that former Vice President Mike Pence today is expected to rebut again claims by Trump that Pence could have overturned the election to let Trump remain in power despite losing the election by more than 7 million votes. So, Pence has been scheduled to speak to the Conservative Federalist Society's conference in Florida. And some of his advisors are saying that he's likely to respond there to Trump's latest attacks. But, Pence, will often disappoint, so let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. But I think that's going to be an interesting development. It's going to be very interesting to me to see what Pence says, because you know, look, the guy's not going to be president of the United States. He's not going to win the Republican nomination, but he's right there at that pivot point of deciding how he wants history to remember him. And he's got a defining moment that could actually be one of the kind of profiles in courage for democracy. I know that certain people disagree with me about this, but or he could just piss it away and figure that there's some way to get himself back into favor in Mar-a-Lago. But I don't know what he's going to do. We'll see.
I think he's gonna keep finding a way to make nobody happy.
And
I don't know.
he
You remember
will
I
end
went
up
to
that way. Yeah.
yeah, I went to see him in South Carolina, his first speech back, the
Yeah.
first time he was supposed to distance himself, and, he pays lip service to disagreeing with Trump on the 6th, right, and doing the right thing, and I'm sure he will tonight in front of the lawyers and say that there was no legal standing for me to do this and that we should stop, trying to advance things that are outside the law. But it's within this context of how great the Trump administration was writ large, right? And the man still thinks he can be president.
Yeah.
I find that preposterous, but he really does. The people around him do. And I think that he will continue to offer this kind of limp noodle
The odds would favor that.
pushback, right? That like where he says, I guess he says the right thing in narrow, if you just read one sentence in a newspaper article, but broadly, he doesn't push back, and it's like, where is the emotion? And this man sent a mob
Well,
to try to kill you. And yet he's still going to talk about how he showed broad shouldered leadership and just made a bad judgment call in this electoral count act. I mean, it's like, I guess it's courage, and it's like, it's the limpest courage ever.
I am not betting against you on all of this. So, have you seen the movie Don't Look Up?
I have. Yep.
Okay. I was thinking about it this week. I mean, there are flaws in the movie, and I don't want to get into whether it was a good movie or a bad movie or anything, but it did nail a couple of things. So, of course, for people who don't know, there is this comet headed straight for Earth. It's going to destroy all life and everything. And there are people trying to warn about it. But one of the things I think the movie does pretty well is showing how the media will always get distracted by some sort of a, celebrity squirrel off here that they're really obsessed about this one empty-headed celebrity, whether she's breaking up with her boyfriend or everything. I kind of was feeling that way this week where we have the former president of the United States announcing, yes, I actually did try a coup. You can handle the truth. He's actually standing up there and saying it in real time. And here we are going, so let's talk about Whoopi Goldberg and who Jeff Zucker is diddling and stuff. It's like, and you know what I'm saying? It is a perfect example of the way that we have all these big things out there, and yet what sucks up most of the oxygen? So can we spend like 15 seconds? Whoopi Goldberg says something stupid about the Holocaust, is suspended by ABC after apologizing. Should she have been suspended?
I don't care.
Yeah, I'm telling
I
you. I
don't
mean,
care. It is not. The whole thing is insane, Charlie. Who cares? It worked out kind of as it should have. A celebrity has a talk show. They said something stupid. They got pushed back on. Uh, uh, they get off air. They hear the pushback from people. They're like, "Yeah, I guess what I said was pretty stupid." They said what they said was stupid. The network
yeah.
suspends them
Okay,
for as a CYA, and then
15
it's over.
seconds left. Okay.
Yeah, okay, sorry, then it's over. Who cares? This is
What's
not
that?
a threat
Okay.
to fucking free speech or anything. Like, this is all fine.
Well, and also it's just so ridiculous because it accomplishes nothing, but they have to go through the performative motions of all of it. Look, it's The View where you have celebrities on talking about things they know shit about. And so, hey, amazingly, on The View, somebody says something stupid. End of story. Okay, so
Just I can I do one more thing about who the worst people are? Kind of like Whoopi, but the worst people in this whole thing are the people who are obsessed with cancel culture and who now have to performatively be like, and now, and I don't, and I, in order to be
yeah,
consistent, I also don't
yeah.
think Whoopi should be canceled. And it's just like, but nobody's canceled. No, Joe Rogan's not canceled. Whoopi's not canceled. Everybody's fine. Like, we do not need to have a big article in the National Review about the end of free speech. Everybody's fine. Nothing happened. It's like everybody is okay. Some people said something, one opinion, other people disagreed. Some people said something stupid, they apologized. It's the world is continuing to spin on its axis.
Okay, so should I be pissed about this?
Oh.
I just got an email.
Okay. Uh-oh.
So your first reaction should be, "You're reading emails while you're talking to me on the
Yeah,
podcast?"
that was a good
Yes.
shtick I just had right there, a good little bit, and you're
I
not even
see, I
listening
just
to it, that's fine.
I figure, see, this is one of the advantages of having you on, because it's like, "Tim Miller, go."
Put in
Okay,
the
and then
quarter.
I can go off, do stuff and everything, and come back, and I know that you've had this great rip. So, actually, Bill sent me this.
Okay.
Some guy named, should I even try to pronounce his name? Vivek something, just, put out an email saying, "Announcing my second book. Dear family and friends, I'm excited to announce my second book, Nation of Victims. The book will be published in September. I'd be grateful if you could pre-order it." Big headline, Nation of Victims by Vivek. That's my fucking book title. I wrote The Nation of Victims in 1992. Come up with your own goddamn title. If you're telling, okay,
Well,
so
imitation is the sincerest form of flattery,
Oh,
Charlie.
okay, so it's a little bit more serious. The fall of Jeff Zucker at CNN. I would normally say that, just another one of these celebrity weird things. But 2 points about it. Number one, it just doesn't seem to add up that much that he claims he is resigning immediately because he had a consensual affair that he didn't disclose. Punishment fit crime. Obviously, you got all the Cuomo stuff. It's all messy. But number two, I'm sorry, I just can't have a pity party for Jeff Zucker given the role that he played in, I suppose you could say, in the attack on democracy. But he's the guy that put Donald Trump on television with The Apprentice. He's the guy that made the decision to air those rallies wall to wall. His legacy is, I'm sorry, I can't be part of the fan club.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm even worse than that. I'm an anti-fan. And in addition, he's the guy that put Jeffrey Lord on TV and sent a car up to Pennsylvania every day so he could come down and do lies on behalf of Donald Trump. And then, as
Yeah.
JVL wrote in his newsletter about hired Corey Lewandowski 3 days after he was fired as campaign manager, and when he had an NDA. The whole thing. JVL posited that it was white affirmative action, and there may be some of that, but I worry that maybe he has some kind of effect over people. I mean, like there apparently there was this big uproar at the CNN DC office,
Yeah.
where otherwise smart people were like we're really mad about this on Zucker's behalf. Apparently, there are Democratic Congress people that have been calling CNN folks saying they're worried about our democracy's ability to
No.
survive. That might be bullshit. That might be bullshit. CNN PR. I don't know, but like I don't get it. He's just a TV producer. Like he's a glorified TV producer and their ratings are going down and the network has turned into a lot of talk, which is fine, but I think that there's some argument for pivoting back towards like more news gathering and doing things beyond chatty panels. And I don't see it. And his actions in 2015 and 2016, I'll tell you, Charlie, I don't think I've told this on this podcast before. I had one of the nerds that worked for me on Jeb's campaign go and look and count the number of times Jeb had been mentioned on CNN between Trump's announcement
Hmm, hmm.
and a certain date. It was like in the fall. And they were mad that Jeb wasn't coming on more. And I was like, you want to know why he's not coming on more? Look at this. And it was like, I don't have the number, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was basically let's say Jeb had been mentioned 100 times.
Yeah.
Like like 78 of the times were or what was Jeb saying in response to Trump or what was Trump saying in response to Jeb? 20 of the times were his poll numbers. 2 times were other things. Right? I mean, like their coverage, which was Jeff directed of the 2016 primary, was madness. And it was Trump was the sun and everyone else was circling around him. It was not just the empty podiums, which were bad enough. And so, I don't know that that's like the reason Trump won. Obviously, he tapped into something with the
Well, it
voters,
didn't hurt.
but it certainly didn't fucking help. And
No,
so now, yeah, it didn't hurt either. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
okay, so
so
for people to remember what you're talking about, the empty podiums, I mean, they were so slavish in their coverage that they would actually have a split screen where they would be doing the news, and then they would have like a shot of the empty podium waiting for this candidate, one of a dozen candidates. It was, if you want to write a history of how the mainstream media screwed itself, this deserves an entire chapter.
For sure, for sure. So, I agree with you. The story seems kind of weird, and it doesn't. I don't know what the real truth is behind the scenes about why he's leaving. But to me, it's been the hagiography of him afterwards that is just mind-boggling. At best, he was a net negative impact on our democracy. He
Well,
certainly
I
was
think
not a
so.
savior of it, and he certainly is replaceable. There's this weird notion that like Jeff Zucker is not replaceable. God help us if Jeff Zucker's not replaceable.
Okay, so speaking of people who are replaceable, you had a really tough piece this week about Chuck Schumer. You broke bad on Chuck
I
Schumer this
did.
week.
Yeah, I did. You know, it just the
Did
map.
did I push you to that? Because I put something on Slack where I said this was just gobsmacking political
No, you did
malpractice.
not push me
You
into it.
you
Well,
this
I
is like
did.
great minds thinking alike.
Yeah, it was
Okay,
great. It
alright,
was an example of
okay,
great minds thinking
alright,
alike.
I felt
Because
guilty.
as I said in the article, I've had this since I've had the little note in my little notes that's like the Chuck and Nancy show. If I like, it's got to come to an end sometime soon. I've been thinking that for a while. They just the age, not to be ageist, but just with Biden as as a combination, it just the visuals are not great about the party's gerontocracy. But you wanted to give him some time, and they did get infrastructure passed. They did get the COVID relief passed. He's gotten judges passed, so it hasn't been a horrible record. But since the fall, I just don't know what Chuck Schumer's been doing, and I forget if you talked about it on your
Mhm,
podcast or I just read it on his Substack. But Iglesias, also Matt Iglesias also wrote about this, and you guys had a great podcast together
mhm,
where he's talking about how weird it is that he kept hearing about the fact that Schumer really did have fears of an AOC primary.
yeah.
And I'm like, this, if that is really why he's acting like this, if that's really why they did this stupid voting rights show that had no chance of passing, that kind of minimized the importance of this very critical issue, because he just needed to protect his flank from an AOC primary. And that is insane if that's true. And if it's not true, it's just a sign of really bad strategic judgment. So I don't know that it's really possible for Schumer to be replaced before the midterms, but I was hoping that at least would be a wake up call to the Democrats in DC who read us that there needs to be a change in tactic and a change in tack if he's going to be kept around, because the moves on with Manchin, how he cut that deal with Manchin that didn't tell anyone about it. For people that haven't seen the background, they
Unbelievable.
signed a piece of paper where Manchin said, "Chuck, on BBB, here are my limits: 1.5 trillion max. There's some of these programs I'm not going to be for, other ones I will be for." Again, it wasn't the perfect deal for progressives, but it's still 1.5 trillion is still double the Obama stimulus. I mean, Manchin was still given a lot of leg on. You could have gotten some big programs for 1.5 trillion and some big feathers in your cap you could campaign on. Chuck cuts that deal with him, then doesn't tell anybody, figuring that he can maybe twist about Manchin's arm behind his back to get him to support more. Like what? And then
In
it comes. He
including he doesn't
doesn't,
tell when you say don't tell anybody, doesn't tell Biden,
or
doesn't tell
Pelosi.
Pelosi.
Yeah.
I just
Like, what
can't
are
even
you
get my I
doing?
cannot even get my head around it. I mean,
Yeah,
honestly, I
just political malpractice. What are you
yeah.
doing? And so then obviously BBB collapses. So here we are. We're back at square zero. His original deal with Manchin is off the table. Whatever they're going to get from him now is going to be worse from a progressive perspective. And in order to cover up for it, he did this voting rights charade. It's been a bad strategic few months for Chuck Schumer, and they need to wake the hell up over there. And so, hopefully, I feel like this is the nice thing about being a former Republican is that we can kind of be YOLO. I had some Democratic friends who texted me and they're like, "I agree with you on this, but if I tweet it, it's like I get yelled at by so and so." So
Well, we get yelled at.
we have the freedom to do that.
Okay, speaking of being yelled at, do we wanna destroy our mentions here? Oh, by the way, I gotta say, people who ought to check out your this week's Not My Party. I didn't know which direction you were gonna go on the whole issue of affirmative action and the Supreme Court candidate, and, because, I'm thinking, woke Tim Miller is gonna go, all in on all of this, but you had a very nuanced take on it. I thought you did a really masterful job of pointing out the issue, pointing out the hypocrisy of, some of the Republican critics of Joe Biden, but also reality check about public opinion on this issue. So I think people should check that out.
Yeah, thanks. It's a tough one.
It is
You
a tough
want
one.
people to be like, "Oh, rah rah rah," and so look, I'm a person I'm woke to Miller. I am a person who thinks representation matters, and I think it should be a factor. But I do think that in the bubble, in the Twitter bubble, in particular, in the left wing bubble, there is a lack of awareness for
Well, it was
how
placed.
some of the raw identity stuff gets translated by regular Americans, and it's not popular. Some of the affirmative action stuff is not popular, and I think that there are ways to talk about this and to support representation that is within something that is popular, right? Which is just advocating for social justice and advocating for diverse viewpoints, and like all of that is good. But it's like the quota stuff, rubs people
No.
the wrong way.
So speaking of the
Yeah,
bubble, apparently there is a piercing of the bubble here. I thought it was interesting. Joe Biden goes to New York, meets with the new mayor of New
yeah.
York, Eric Adams, and is explicit as possible. Says we are not going to defund the police. We are not going to take away your resources. We are not going to leave the neighborhoods unprotected. And of course, you can tell that he's been listening to people saying you need to say this. But it is fascinating watching some of the blowback that he gets from, progressives in places like New York who are like, "No, no, Joe, you shouldn't be saying these things," but we'll see where it goes. Okay, so speaking of, like, destroying our mentions.
Just really quick on this, I want to add
Sure.
one thing because who else has chimed in on them? And just a named for people to keep an eye on if they're Bulwark listeners, they don't know him. Richie Torres, and we should maybe have him on the
Yes.
podcast or something. Richie
Yeah.
Torres is a congressman from up there.
Yeah, very progressive.
Yeah, much more progressive than us, but has been really good on this issue and really clear eyed, in talking about the importance of balancing safety and also caring about gun violence, and so anyway, so Adams, you can see. I guess this is why I wanted to mention it because it is
Yeah.
encouraging. Just coming off the unanimity conversation with the RNC, it's not good politics to be divided as a party, so it's not great for the Democrats that they're dealing with all this. But for those of us who are hoping for a rationally based party, it is encouraging that there at least is a Adams, Biden, Torres faction. That might not be well represented on Twitter.com, but like within the party, within the elected officials and the voters, since they voted for these people, by the way, it's encouraging to see that.
It is very encouraging. Okay, so since we haven't completely destroyed our mentions yet, you were discussing the question of gerrymandering on the live stream last night, and this is one of those. I actually have like a note for a thing that when I am feeling up to it to write a piece about democracy with a small d, democracy with a big D, power and principle, urging people not to confuse all of them. But the gerrymandering issue is, and again, and take a deep breath here, is one of these where I understand that Democrats cannot unilaterally surrender. But one of the things we're finding out is that gerrymandering, which has been held up as this existential threat to democracy, it's actually not turning out that bad for the Democrats. In fact, Dave Wasserman and others are saying that looks like the Democrats are actually going to come out ahead on this because for every horrible story of gerrymandering in Texas or wherever, or in Tennessee, the Democrats have been pretty aggressive in gerrymandering in New York, in Maryland, and Illinois, and they're probably going to come out net negative. So this is one of those things where, okay, guys, since we're dealing with this existential threat to democracy, which I think is real, where do you put gerrymandering?
Yeah, I put it pretty low, so flame away. But I think this is a complicated thing, so just bear with me. Everybody, sit in the rocking chair for 1 second. Let me
Mm,
just
yeah,
I
yeah.
just explain my view on this because the Democrats are, just as a matter of fact, the Democrats are going to probably come out ahead this time, or at least close to even. Now they were going from a baseline of a gerrymandered house that benefited the Republicans, right? We aren't going from baseline neutral because the 2010 gerrymander for really benefited Republicans quite a lot. That said, Democrats have been ruthless in New York and other places, in Maryland, and the courts have intervened in a few places in Republican states, which is good to kind of create more fair maps, and as a result, we're going to end up with kind of a neutral or slightly Democratic favor on the 2020 redistricting. Okay, so that said, I think that there should be some changes to the way that we do districts. Like, I think
Oh, yeah.
communities should live together, right? Like the Utah gerrymander drives me crazy. I've mentioned this a couple times. It's like Salt Lake City, they turn the state into four corners, and so they're like four little arms that come into Salt Lake City and take out all the Democrats. And so then each district can be Republican and have all the people in rural Utah. Like Salt Lake City should have a district. Like this is the kind of thing that shouldn't be hard, right? A community should have its own district. Like that's the whole point of having geographically based districts. I would love to see some kind of reform that tries to incentivize competitiveness in districts. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but all
But
this stuff
those
gets complicated. Yeah.
well, it's complicated because those might not be consistent. because
Right.
if you keep communities together, given the way that voters have sorted out,
Yes.
that is going to, create these bubbles. And places like Wisconsin, for example, one of the reasons why it's so hard to redistrict is because Democrats are super concentrated in Milwaukee and super concentrated in Dane County in the Madison area, and Republicans are super concentrated in the suburbs. And if you try to draw lines that make the districts competitive, then you break up the community. You can either have communities of interest, or you can have competitive, but you really can't have both necessarily.
Yeah, this is right, and I got in a
Yeah,
fight
yeah.
with this on a panel. There was a progressive activist, and I was on this panel, and gerrymandering came up a couple years ago, and, I just expressed the same view I just expressed, right? I think communities should be
Yeah.
together. I think we should try to incentivize competitiveness. But then the progressive person in this case disagreed because they wanted, and this is again a fine goal to have with districts. They want majority minority
Right.
districts, right? But if you're in Texas, for example, to have multiple majority minority districts, you do have to kind of do one of these silly, goofy things where you split up Houston, right? And so there are two there are two districts, and you draw these kind of weird little maps like you do in New York City to get to combine more minority heavy areas with richer Upper East Side areas or whatever it is. And so you get these kind of funky looking maps. So it's like, are you upset that they look funky,
Right.
or are you upset? Like, what are you upset about, right? So it's complicated. And to your exact point right there about how we're self-sorting. We are all self-gerrymandering. And I think that there is this
You're right.
view on the left, that like with if we fixed all the districts, it would help Democrats, maybe a little bit, right? And then there's this view in the center that's like, oh, if we fixed how we did this, we wouldn't have so many extreme people in there. It's like, that's not true. Like, Marjorie Taylor Greene's district is not gerrymandered, right? Lauren Boebert's district is not gerrymandered. Like, they just represent insane constituents. Like,
Right.
the constituents are the problem. They want what Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene are selling. Neither of them are in crazy districts. So, look, I think that there are certain things that we could do. But then there'd be a big fight about it. But like, the answer is the democracy is not being saved by this, right? Like this is not the silver bullet. It's not the magic elixir. It is not the problem. And like lumping it in with the vote counting and voter suppression and all this stuff, I think is wrong, and I think it's part of the mistake of the Democrat strategy on this from the start.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and again, I understand why Democrats are doing what they're doing. They feel they're just playing, the cards that are dealt them, but power is not the same as principle, and so what happens is it does, lower the credibility issue. You get a lot of eye rolling, but we'll see how this plays out, which is why I keep coming back to the Electoral Count Act. If you want to talk about the five alarm fire, the ticking time bomb that we have to disarm right now, it is the Electoral Count Act and the possibility of a coup. I thought JVL made a good point last night where he said, gerrymandering is bad. It's more like, poison sort of seeping into the water. It has a long term negative effect, but right now the house is on fire. And I
You
think
know,
that there needs to be, a distinction there.
one other thing I wrote, I think maybe on Monday, about how there's this demand of never Trumpers that we all care about norms and traditions, and how I
Yes. Oh,
bristle at
yeah.
that because I don't love norms. And like, some norms are good and some norms are bad. Like, this is such a prime example of that. Like, in a healthy country with two healthy parties, like, we could just look at this and say, "Wow, let's stop the power politics games. Like, it's not really helping anybody. It's just undermining faith in the system. Can't we all get together and figure out, some basic rules? Not everybody's going to come in with everything they want, for all the reasons we just laid out, because sometimes these things, compactness and competitiveness and representation are at odds, and like, come up with some basic rules and just redo this and see if we like the next system. And then in 10 years, if there were some unintended consequences, we can tinker with it again. Like, that's how a healthy system would work. And by the way, it is how our system worked for a while, where there were lots of changes to these types of things. And party power politics has ruined that. And now there's not even, like, to even say that is like laughable. Like, you would, like, somebody, if I said that around my friends, like, this is what I think we should do with gerrymandering, like, they would laugh at me and be like, you should be on a no labels panel with that
Ooh.
nonsense. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
it's
Like, and that's
kinda
how
mean.
how sad is that's where we're at.
It is sad. So, anything else you want to rant about before we go into the weekend?
Ooh, I wasn't ready for
Fine.
that question. I was ready for all the other questions. I had my shtick, I had my riffs. I don't have anything. I'm excited about Joe Burrow.
Oh, well, it's an off week this week, though.
I am excited about Joe Burrow, yeah, so we won't get to talk
Yeah.
about that if I'm not on next week. I'm excited about the little LSU love, the Joe Burrow to Jamar Chase connection in the Super Bowl next Sunday. I've got a T-shirt. I'll probably be wearing a very obnoxious T-shirt on next week's Not My Party that has Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase's face on it. So I'm pretty excited about that. I'm
So
concerned about Aaron Rodgers coming to the Broncos. That might be something that's relevant for the two of us. I'm
that's too
pretty
too
concerned
soon.
about that. I'm
Too
going to need a
soon.
memo from you if Aaron
Yeah.
Rodgers goes to the Broncos on how to deal with my mixed feelings about having Aaron Rodgers on my home team.
It's hard to overstate how negative, folks are in here in, the cheese world, about Aaron Rodgers. I actually posted a couple things that were somewhat negative about him, and usually you get huge blowback, like, "Leave Aaron Rodgers alone," but did not get any of that. So the NFL took two things just, popping into my mind here. Number one, have has the league ever had a better playoff series than this one? I mean, look, whatever side you're on, these games were freaking amazing. I think it
They've
was
been
just
amazing. Joe Burrow is
unbelievable.
magical is part of the reason,
Yeah, okay.
and, I do feel bad for Eric Trump, who quit
That's
watching football over Colin
yeah.
Kaepernick, so he hasn't been able to enjoy it. That's too bad for him.
And remember one of the signature moments for Mike Pence was going to a football game and then walking out of the football game because
Storming
somebody took
out!
a name. Yeah,
I've
because
always thought it was
we
weird that the wokes won football in the culture war. I never would have seen that coming.
well, speaking of that though, I think the NFL's got a real problem with this Flores lawsuit, the racial discrimination
Mhm.
lawsuit, and the fact that I mean, and the whole Rooney Rule, which apparently there was sort of the wink, wink that every team had to interview an African American, and some of the owners, some of the teams apparently just treated I mean, they turned it into a farce, and now they're getting busted on it. So,
Can I just,
mm,
because this is relevant to the Supreme Court thing too,
yeah,
honestly, right?
yeah,
And it's like they're like, we're gonna have this quota where you have to have one person in an interview. Like people don't like that, right? For this might be latent racism or white fragility, but white people don't like it. They bristle at it. They're like, why should there be an automatic slot? And then obviously for good reason. People like Brian Flores, people of color don't like it. So like, wow, I'm just getting brought in as a show pony for this one interview, and like, and they bristle at it. It's like there needs to be a broader value of we really need to have more diversity and representation, and like that needs to be a broader value that happens to the top, and people at the top should be criticized when they don't fall into that. That's easier said than done, obviously, but it is crazy that there's one black coach in the NFL. I mean, all the players are black. Not all, but, I mean, 80, 90% of the players are black. One of the coaches is. You can't look at that and not look at the ownership in the NFL and think that there's bias at play. You just can't look at it like that. And so I do think that they're in trouble. And the Bill Belichick goof
I think that's hilarious.
is like, just prime, right? Where
For
that the
people who are
guy
not
got
following this, Bill Belichick, is texting, and apparently he's not really good at it, so he thinks he's texting another guy, and he
Brian
texts,
Dickleball, who's
yeah,
this white coach
he
who gets
said,
the job.
"Hey, congratulations on getting the job. You're gonna be great at this job." And this guy, Brian Flores, who had not yet interviewed for the job, is going, "What?" And he goes, "Well, this is what, it's Brian, right?" I'm sorry, what was his name?
Yeah,
Rabel?
Brian, yeah.
So he's texting the wrong guy, making it very clear that he knew that the Giants had already picked somebody, but before they'd even gone through the motions of, oh man, how do you text the wrong person? But
I've done that. So,
have
I do get it. So it's maybe one step, old man thing, and another for me is sometimes I get too hot with texting people on my computer on the iMessage. That's dangerous. Don't do that. Don't text people via iMessage on the computer. That's dangerous. It happens, but how much more stark of an example can you get than that? Like, you haven't even had your interview as like the one minority candidate, and the other guy's already gotten the job, and it's just um anyway, good for Flores. Flores probably blew up his career over this, by the way. He's a
Yeah,
young
I know.
guy. People thought he did a good job in Miami. He got fired, but because the results weren't the same on the field, but he did seem like somebody that'd be up for other jobs, and owners obviously don't like somebody who's going to air dirty laundry. So hopefully it makes a difference. And but this stuff's been going on. I mean, it's like, come on, 50 years now, and the Rooney Rule is from the 80s, 40 years, like 35 years this has been going on, and still one coach. It's a sign that the system's broke.
Yeah, you would think so. We haven't even talked about the fact that Joe Biden took out the leader of ISIS.
We should have talked about that.
We
Hell
should
yeah,
talk
Joe
about
Biden.
that.
Hell yeah,
Yeah.
Joe Biden. That was a good win for Joe Biden, taking out the leader of ISIS, and, I don't know. We'll see what happens in Ukraine. I haven't been as negative as everybody else at the Bulwark about the Ukraine stuff. We'll see. I don't know. I feel like they've been, I loved that they were slapping at Josh Hawley over this, and,
Oh, yeah.
they seem
I'm pro that.
the foreign policy stuff seems to be riding a little bit. We'll see.
All right. Listen, have a great weekend. Tim Miller, thanks for coming back on the podcast. Appreciate it always.
You too, Charlie. See you, man.
And thank you all for listening to today's Bulwark podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. We'll be back on Monday, and we'll do this all over again.